to start with, so we all understand, the general overview of this whole movement to me is not that it's really about Bitcoin, it's about the underlying technology, the blockchain, ledger. That's because for 6,000 years, humans have faced a choice when engaged in consensual exchange. Do we trust each other, or do we have just a central institution that we don't need to know each other and trust each other, we just trust the central institution? And we have accumulated these centralized institutions that I think aren't worth what we pay them, and often are filled with various kinds of mischief. As an example of that, one that comes to mind is Wall Street itself. I'm going to remind you on October in 2008, when the world melted down, and Alan Greenspan was called before Congress on the 23rd of 08 to say what's going on. He made this statement that the left has jumped on and saying, oh, I see Alan Greenspan, even he says markets don't work. Well, they missed the main event. Watch closely.
There are additional regulatory changes that this breakdown of the central pillar of competitive markets requires in order to return to stability, particularly in the areas of fraud, settlement, and securitization.
Well, with fraud, we know what he was talking about. Byrne made off, securitization, mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, etc. But what's that settlement thing he mentioned? Settlement is dull. Two things you need to know is it's dull as dishwater, and secondly, it's an incredibly important part of Wall Street. Think of just basic settlement as you have an investor buying some stock from a hedge fund. I'm simplifying this, I'm going to show you some cartoons to explain this. You know, the settlement is the process when, after they've made the deal, the actual exchange of money for security is called settlement. Of course, we don't have grandmas talking to hedge fund guys. They each are represented in the net market, capital market, by a broker. They have cash and stock trading between them. But it's actually, the truth is, more complicated than that. And here we get to a really funny story. When I was 7, 1969, my pop, who was an insurance guy, took me down to Wall Street. They wanted me to see Wall Street. And all I noticed were a bunch of guys on bicycles. And there really were back then. Men on bicycles were bicycling around Wall Street. Well, that's all I wanted to pay attention to. It was really frustrating. Well, it turns out they're called runners or stock jobbers. And how Wall Street worked was these fellows on bicycles had burlap sacks of stock, and they were running around among the brokers delivering stock and clipping things. That's how Wall Street worked. The 1960s volume on Wall Street quadrupled, and these folks logjammed. It led to something called the Great Wall Street Paperwork Crisis. From 1969 to 1971, Wall Street was closed on Wednesdays. It was only open 4 days a week, and on those days it was only trading about 4 hours a day. That was to lower the volumes of the guys on bicycles and catch up. In 1971, the SEC called the industry together and proposed computerizing the system. Now just imagine they had said, we're going to use the computers to schedule the routes of the bike messengers. That's how we're going to speed things up. You would say that's kind of a misapplication of technology. Well, what they did was equally silly. What they did was they said, we're going to create this new, they took a thing that was already actually a back office at the New York Stock Exchange called the DTCC. And they said, we're going to try this thing called a mobilization. By the way, this is not what the industry wanted. What the industry wanted was a peer-to-peer electronic settlement system, direct broker to broker. They said, no, we're going to centralize everything within the DTCC, and we're going to have cash and stock sort of trade through it. And in fact, I'm going to use a really ugly word. I'm told on Wall Street there are 3 things you never talk about: God, politics, and the word I'm about to say. No kidding. It's called seedy and company. Just raise your hand if you own any stock in any publicly traded company in America, please. Okay, all of us with our hands up are incorrect. None of you actually own any stock. You really do not. All the stock in America is legally owned by a corporation you've never heard of called, and I'm not just talking about possession. I'm not talking about safekeeping. They legally own all the stock in publicly traded companies. From that stock is generated sort of representations called share entitlements. And what's actually trading in the stock market, from a legal point of view, or just it's almost like they took Polaroids of stock and traded those. But the legal ownership of what you think of as your stock is actually held by a company you never heard of. And what's happening on Wall Street as cash and money, as cash and stock, as you think you're trading, is there's this very complicated system. There's the DTC and then a ring of about 100 brokers directly plumbed into it, and they're called clearing brokers. And then there's another ring of several thousand brokers plumbed into them. It's sort of a hub and spoke system on top of a hub and spoke system. And what's going on is you buy and sell stock in your E-Trade account. It's all just shifting around like this, and it's not actual stock. And I'm not talking even the physical shares. I'm talking about the electronic shares are not in your accounts. The CDN company owns everything, and all you have are IOUs against IOUs against IOUs against the company that actually holds it. By the way, it's all, if you read your broker statement, you'll find this all laid out. It's at the bottom, upside down, backwards, and Greek. But you don't actually own anything. And if this system ever vapor locks, as it almost did, or as it did in 2008, you'll find out someday that there's nothing to keep. This is a big system of fractional reserve banking without a reserve requirement. And there's all these, a lot of things already set up. So if this seizes, you're going to find out someday that you thought you owned 100 shares of IBM, and so did somebody else, and so did somebody else at the same broker. Each are getting cut back by 2/3, pari passu. It's actually laid out in that legalese. Obviously, I think that's a terrible system. Imagine true settlement. And again, go back to the concept of, let's say, grandma buying just a baseball glove from her neighbor. And the settlement would be the actual cash and baseball glove changing hands. Now imagine you did that on a ledger, and it doesn't matter what the coin is. I'll call it space cash, following South Park. Imagine there's a type of coin called space cash. And what happens when grandma, and let's say this ledger is cryptographically protected, public and transparent. What's happened, you get rid of the physical cash, and when grandma wants to buy the baseball glove, you're writing in the ledger down one of her coins and incrementing, you're decrementing one of her coins and incrementing one of his coins and moving the baseball glove. You could apply the same concept to Wall Street settlement as follows. Imagine we're back with a hedge fund guy, and you've got some stock that's been tokenized. When grandma buys a share of stock, you want to take away one of her coins and add it to the hedge fund guys, and you want to decrement one of his shares and add it to her pile of shares. You could do the whole Wall Street settlement process in such a ledger, thereby eliminating that pig's breakfast of a system, and eliminating it. And by the way, by our analysis, you can take out 80 to 90% of the cost, of the friction cost of that system. It's no longer just a theory. Overstock.com, which is sort of my day job, is created a private token, and on, I think, August 4th, we sold it, a $5 million bond to First New York Securities. It was a legitimate bond. It was completely digital. It wasn't a representation of some paper contract we had. It was all recorded in the blockchain. The virtues of such a system are you reunite transaction with settlement. Those of you who are familiar, about 10 years ago, I got into a major beef with Wall Street because I thought that pig's breakfast of a system actually created lots of opportunity for various no-goodniks to get up to some mischief. And so I sort of went on an attack, which I called my mitzvah, but they called my jihad against Wall Street to try to clean up this system. It's transparent. There are no friction costs, or maybe 10% of the friction costs of the current system. It eliminates various forms of market rigging, which depend on the slop in that kind of pig's breakfast system that I showed you a few slides ago. It's been tested, and we are the first company, I believe. We are now ready to issue. Overstock has filed an S3 with the SEC about 7 or 8 months ago. That's a statement saying we're ready to issue this kind of stock. And after half a year of handling and negotiating and talking and explaining to the SEC, about a month ago, they declared it effective. So Overstock is now in a position to be the first company to issue a public crypto security. We've issued a private crypto security. Now we are ready. And we built all of this within a subdivision of Overstock called, yes, we have these, we're just designing the coins now. Now, I actually can't say that we're going to do this because that would make this talk. This is neither an offer to sell nor solicitation of an offer to buy. And the truth is, we need the capital. We need the capital. If we do this, we're going to do it for a small amount. This is like Jonas Salk injecting himself with polio to show that it works. We built the system called T0 that underlies all of this. We brought it to the market. We introduced it a few months ago into the market. And having built this system, Overstock would like to be the first public company to issue shares, tokenized shares on the system. So that's T0. We think we're well ahead of anyone else in the industry on that score. So we built both the system. We bought a node of the national market system called SpeedRoute that already does 2.5% of the volume of the equity trades in the U.S. capital market. And having bought that and then built the crypto platform on top of it, we want to be the first company to actually use it. But let's see if it works out that way. Thank you. Can I take any questions?